finish our lecture on publishing and the publishing industry, I'm going to talk about meeting editors and presenting yourself as a business person, trying to make some money off of this product of yours you produced. Then we are going to segue into self-publishing and do some self-publishing lectures. We have brought along Joe, whose last name is Bassett. Yes. I got it right finally. I've only known you for what, 8 years or something like that? Joe took my class years ago, and then when the whole self-publishing revolution happened, he was very well poised. He was written a lot of things and was ready to start self-publishing and take advantage of it. So he's there and is a big proponent of it. And so I've invited him to come talk to you for about 10 minutes or so on his experience in the real world. Because while I have self-published, and I'll talk about it, I live in Magic Christmas Land, right? I already have a very well-established and known brand name. And so for me, self-publishing is a very different experience than it is for someone who's just starting out. We did bring some contracts for you guys to peruse. What I will probably do is not give these to you now. I will probably leave them up here on this table afterward for you to come up and look through however you would like to, or things like that. It's probably what I'll do. So you can have like real world contracts. Isaac grabbed them, so he grabbed one of my YA contracts, he grabbed one of my movie TV deals, and he grabbed one of my adult novel contracts. So you have a little bit of everything up here that you can look at and just kind of see how they work. So, when we broke off last episode, we were talking about, I had just turned on the fire hose. These are the fire hose lectures, where it's just like, here you go, here's how publishing kind of works, at least one author's perspective on it. And I had told you about the breakdowns on price and value, and why you would want to license your books to a publisher, or at least what you are getting for what you would give up. Okay? The lecture today is going to focus on, okay, if I am going to go this route, how do I actually get published? But I wanted you to upfront have all the information about what's going on behind the scenes so that you can think of yourself the right way. In the past, I would talk about how to publish first and then do all of this stuff, and I think having the context of in mind, if you are a business person who has a product which you are looking for someone with whom to partner, rather than I am a starving artist who will take 2 cents and a peanut in order to see my name on the shelves, I think that that change in perspective is going to be very helpful for this context. So, you want to be published. We're going to work on this under that assumption right now, if you did. You in sci-fi fantasy are actually in a very fortunate position, because sci-fi fantasy was a grassroots publishing movement. If you go back in time to the 50s and the 40s and times like this, there wasn't as much science fiction fantasy. A lot of the mainstream publishers didn't really know what to do with it. And yes, there were some pulp, some magazines, some great writers, but what happened is the whole industry came out of people who love science fiction and fantasy starting to meet together to talk about this weird stuff that no one else wanted to talk about with them, and starting conventions, particularly in the 50s and 60s, where they could meet up and talk about it. These conventions were basically their version of Facebook before the internet, where you could have a group that got together and chat about these things. And growing up out of these conventions were a lot of fans of the genre who were very interested in it, who then became a lot of what we call the Silver Age, then they call them Golden Age, whatever age you want to talk about, the science fiction fantasy writers during this era, and the editors and publishers. A lot of them came up through the con experience. And so that's why you will find stories about Isaac Asimov going to the cons and working on the local fanzine, because it's like, that's where I came from. That's why you run into people like my editor, Moshe. My editor Moshe, who was a super fan collector of, I believe it was Analog. We'd have to ask him, one of the big magazines, and was missing a few back issues. Realized that the publisher of that magazine lived somewhere pretty close to him in New York somewhere, and just went to his house and knocked on the door to ask if he could get the 3 back issues he needs. There's another seat right up here if someone's looking for one. And there is a chair just right here if somebody wants it. Any other open seats? Publishing lectures are popular.
Kind of a seat.
Yeah, you're also welcome to go grab chairs or things like that or whatnot. So he knocked on the door. The editor answered, is like, oh yeah, I've got those 2 back issues. By the way, do you want to start reading Slush for us? My editor's like 16 at the time. He's like, sure. You know, it's free, but I get to read it early and decide what gets in the magazine. And so he started doing this. He's been to like every Worldcon that ever existed except for like 4 or something like that. You know, he ended up working on the magazine and then getting employed at this place and then getting employed at this place and eventually took a job at Tor because he wanted to be at one of the big science fiction fantasy publishers. You meet a lot of people like this in the industry. What this means is sci-fi fantasy is a lot less corporate than a lot of the publishing genres. And there is a nice tight-knit community still, and the editors tend to be one of us, right? I don't know a lot about a lot of the other publishing industries. I do know in sci-fi fantasy, the editors tend to be people who love science fiction and fantasy and came up through the fan ranks. And a lot of them are from New York and are part of these communities. And so the convention circuit is still a very good way to meet editors. And by conventions, there's really, I will highlight 3 styles of cons when we talk about conventions. There are what we call our local literary. Local literary conventions are things like the Universe and Everything, which I encourage many of you to go to, Conduit in Salt Lake. These are the local community, volunteer-run science fiction conventions that focus on being a fan and participating in fandom. These are very different from Comic Cons, otherwise known as media cons. These are things, I guess the parentheses go right there. These are things like Comic Con, obviously, Dragon Con. There are things like Supernova in Australia that I did. There are most of the Star Trek conventions and things like this. Media cons are focused on presenting sort of more of an expo environment, okay? An expo environment meaning they'll have a big dealer's hall with people who have booths so you can go see all this awesome stuff being sold, and they will bring in superstars and have them do panels and interviews and things like that in order to drive media attention. You'll see a lot more movie stars. You don't see movie stars at these very often, and if you do, then it's the person who starred in Superman 2 30 years ago, who I was on TV with once because we did a local affiliate. It was really interesting. It's me and the Superman 2 villain and a bunch of stormtroopers on like Fox, whatever, 13 or something. But yeah, these you'll see. So if you go to Comic Con, that's going to be a very different experience. My editor explained it this way. He's very entrenched in this style. He said, in here, you are expected to be a participant, and here you are expected to be a spectator. Now, obviously, he loves these a lot. I'm sure there's much more participation here, but here you're being marketed to, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But here, you are going out of your love for fandom and to interact with other fans. And so here, you are not going to find editors at a spectator con. You might find the publisher's publicity department there running a booth and handing out flyers. Those are publicists. They don't talk to the editors. I'm joking, but they're business people, and the editors are a very different crowd. Now, at Tor, the publicists tend to be super fans also, because everybody at Tor tends to be super fans. But these people, the publicists are not going to be people who can buy your book. It's always funny for me to go to one of these things and be hanging out at the Tor booth and have an aspiring writer come up and try to talk the publicist into taking their book. This is a person who's doing that, who has not done any research into their field. This is what you want to avoid. Not necessarily that one experience. You want to come across as a professional in your business who knows this business. If you were someone who was selling, let's say, anything else. Let's say you're selling widgets, whatever your widgets are selling, and you go to the person in the shop at the Mac store, let's say, and you're like, you should be using our processors in your Macs. You're going to look like a fool, and you're going to get nowhere. That you laugh at that, but in publishing, a lot of people, because we are artists, we assume that we don't have to have this hat of being a business person. My job in these lectures, we've talked to the artist for 12 weeks. In these lectures, we're talking to the business person. And your job is to come across as a professional. So, the third type of con I do want to mention is we do have also the sort of more conference, writers' conference sort of things. And these are good for practicing your craft. Usually you'll see things like this. Writers for Young Readers is one of these. Maori's Writers Conference is famous. To an extent, things like Clarion, which is more run like a school environment, are things like this. These are where you pay usually a premium to get in the door. They will bring in lecturers and instructors, and they will teach you actively. These focus a lot more on the craft, but often they will bring in an agent or an editor and give you opportunities with pitch sessions and things like this. This is kind of a pay-to-play sort of environment, but it's very structured, and it can be very, very handy. For instance, going to the literary cons, which also have not local but national or international, going to one of those can probably, you're flying to it, you have to pay to get your badge membership. They probably are going to cost you around $500, would be my guess. Getting into Writers for Young Readers, I think it was 400 and something. And so, getting this, since it's local, it can be a very good value, all right? So, your job is to think like a professional. Thinking like a professional is going to mean a couple of things. You're going to do your homework and your research. You are going to understand that you may have to invest some money into your career. Imagine that. I mean, you're here paying for this class, so I think you already know it, but you may have to fly to conventions. You will have to get out of your comfort zone and be willing to talk to people. Many of us in sci-fi fantasy are somewhat shy. You're going to have to be pitching yourself and your books. Whatever you can do to practice being able to do this is going to help you. There are ways around this. You don't necessarily absolutely have to be doing what I'm saying, but get in the mindset that you are going to be going and selling your work. You are going to be having to leave your comfort zone, and you're going to have to spend some money often to do this, okay? Now, so, of these, I would say these are the two that you want to be focusing your time on. For Writers' Conference, I would choose your Writers' Conference based on the people, the guests that they are bringing in to lecture, and the opportunities you will have to meet specific agents and editors, okay? So, if you see one that has an agent going to it, that is an agent that you specifically want to work with, and you see that on their guide that you are going to be able to get a 20-minute, or probably not 20-minute, a 5-minute, 10-minute pitch session with that agent, that specific writers' conference then shoots up in value to you, even though it's probably going to be more expensive if you have to fly to it than one of these. These, by the way, are also one of your best bets in teen and YA, because the teen and YA crowd does not have as many of these in the same way. They have a lot more of these, and there's some things kind of like this, but not the same. There's not as much of this. So teen and YA right here, or you can try the backroading in through the teen and YA publishers, editors at the science fiction and fantasy imprints. For instance, Tor has Tor Teen and Starscape, which are their middle grade and YA imprints, which work much more because they're part of Tor, like Tor, than they do like a children's publisher. The children's publishers do tend to be more corporate. I've noticed this, even though they have a very homey, familial sort of feel about them, the fact that children's tends to, as an industry, trying to explain this the right way. Children's is a big business, children's books. Children's books are a way bigger business than science fiction and fantasy. The average big teen book will sell 10 times as much as the average big sci-fi fantasy book. So they bring in a lot more money. Plus there's this whole structure of book fairs and all of these things, which require a lot of extra setup to do direct marketing basically to the teens and the children that exists. And the teen and children's publishing has been around a lot more long than science fiction fantasy publishing. The first real science fiction fantasy imprint, I believe, was Ace in the late 60s or early 70s. Children's publishing has been around since the 1800s. Because of all these things, children's publisher, every major big corporate structure, or one of the big six, had a children's imprint, and usually now has like 6 that they've gobbled up, usually. Whereas science fiction fantasy is only something they started gobbling up in the 90s. So because of this, the children's, it's just the getting through the doors in children's, my experience has been, is a lot harder than getting through the doors in sci-fi fantasy. Because sci-fi fantasy has this whole fandom, grassroots, yes, submit your manuscript unagented and unrequested because, you know, we love brand new authors and all of this sort of stuff. Whereas children's, those doors are a little bit harder to get through. This might be because even though writing a good children's book is not easier than writing a good epic fantasy book, writing a bad one is a lot easier. If you think about it, writing a bad book that is 20,000 words long is a lot easier than writing a bad book that's 250,000 words long. And so their submission piles are a lot higher and things like this. And so anyway, for those of you in teen, it is harder. I will just tell you that straight up. But the potential highs are much higher, sales-wise. You'd only compare Diary of the Wimpy Kid to the Wheel of Time when they were both coming out and their announced print runs to find out that Wheel of Time, you know, the first print run, I think they announced like 500,000, and the Diary of the Wimpy Kid coming out at the same time was like 4 million or something like that. And so you just, yeah, different realm of existence on some of these teen books that really take off in middle grade books. So you're saying, well, all right, so what do I do? These are easy, by the way. They're expensive, but they're easy because you can sign up for your pitch session and things like this. Here, there are pitch sessions at a literary convention. There are a bunch of fan volunteers putting together something that borders on chaos. That allows them to discuss Doctor Who and have parties at night with other nerds. That's what these are, okay? Excuses to get drunk with your nerd friends and talk about Doctor Who. They're also the means by which the old guard and some of the new guard, but primarily the old guard, got together with all of their friends that lived across the country from each other periodically to have fun and chat it and catch up, okay? The two big ones that I recommend are Worldcon.
You mean the Comic-Cons?
No, these are up here, the literary cons. Worldcon and World Fantasy. Worldcon and World Fantasy are the two national or international literary conventions. As a comparison, like the biggest Worldcon in memory, I think was LA Con. Anyway, like a really big Worldcon is 10,000 people. That's enormous, okay? Comic Con is 250,000. All right? They're very different styles. Worldcon, the World Science Fiction Convention where the Hugos are given out, is commonly 5,000 people. And these 5,000 people tend to be a lot of publishing industry regulars, aspiring writers, fans who are very entrenched and interested in the nature of fandom. And they get together and have parties and panels and talk about science fiction and fantasy. Now, this is not a silver bullet. This is not the only way to do this. I want you to make you aware of their existence. When I took this class, Dave said, you are in a position you need to start attending these things and trying to network. That is because, despite how we would wish that it were otherwise, networking is very important in basically every industry you're going to want to go into. Most jobs that people get are jobs that you get because you have met someone beforehand. All right? And publishing, selling a book, is a lot easier if you know the person that you are selling the book to. Duh. Even if they have just met you, and as my editor once said, you know, why you got back to my book, he said, you looked like a nice person, you weren't dressed really weird, you weren't offensive, and you were just so nice. So that's why he kept sitting on my book and waiting to read it. And he's like, oh, I should reject this because I just don't have the time. But he's like, oh, he was so nice. And so he eventually read the book. You have to be getting your book read by people who are in a position to buy it. The way this works as a science fiction fantasy publisher is an editor reads your book, the editor likes the book and goes and usually tries to convince marketing, other people in-house, and the publisher, who is the business person who runs all of this, that this is a book that their imprint should be publishing, and ask for permission to make an offer on it. The money people or the publisher, depending on the place where you are, will say, yes, you're authorized to this amount. You have run what we call a P&L, a profit and loss sheet, that shows similar books, how many you think you'll print, how this will turn a profit. That determines how much we can offer on this book. You run all those numbers, you then can go back to the author and say, we are willing to offer $5,000 as an advance against these royalties on this book because I ran these numbers in this P&L. They're kind of made up numbers because you're just guessing based on what other books like this have done. But it is the way that it happens. So you have to get your book into the hands of this editor who can then go do this. Now, part of an editor's job is to be looking for new acquisitions. They need a constant stream of new books. Yes?
With this sort of situation, you'd be more looking to give your book to an editor or to an agent?
We'll talk about agents in a few minutes.
Okay.
I do this whole thing with editors first, but then we'll talk about agents. You want to be, because what the agent is going to do, you want to get your book into the hands of an editor. An agent gets your hands in the book into the hands of an editor, right? So you want to get your book into the hands of these people. Now, all these people have different tastes. All these people are individuals. All of these people work at different companies. So your job, if you want to publish traditionally in science fiction, fantasy in particular, teen also this will work, is to start learning the names of the imprints, the editors who work there, the books they have acquired in the last couple of years, the conventions they commonly attend. You're basically going to professionally stalk them, okay? You're going to figure out this business and know who all of these people are. Because let's say you send a book, Tor is a great example for this, probably the best example. Let's say you send a book to Tor. Someone go look on Wikipedia and see how many editors there are at Tor. There's some, they list like 9 or 10 on the Wikipedia article of Tor editors. All of these people, excuse me, have very different tastes in books. A book that David Hartwell likes is not necessarily a book that Patrick Nielsen Hayden likes. And that is not necessarily a book that Liz Gorinsky likes. You want to get your book into the hands of the one that will like your book the most. Not send it to Dear Acquisitions Editor. That's how you get in the wall. Remember last week where I said you want to get on the desk? Now, to get on the desk, do your research. Find out the names of the editors. Find the books that they have acquired recently. And then try to interact with them. Do not swarm them. This is not, again, a silver bullet. In the past, I've had editors say, wow, your students are really aggressive. Yes, they are. Because now they all swarm to Worldcon and they go try to find all the editors, but this is how the business works. This is how you get a leg up. Now, you don't necessarily have to be swarming the editors. You definitely don't want to be trying to give them your manuscript right then. You want to know who they are. You want to go to their panels. You want to read the books that they have acquired recently. You want to know something about them. Think about, if we just take the bare, simple minimum, you are submitting a book to an editor at Tor, and that editor gets 2 books. One of them says, "Dear Acquisitions Editor, here is my book. I think you'll like it at the end." And you say, "Dear Liz Korinsky, I have been reading Sherry Priest's novels, and I know you edit Sherry Priest." I'm pretty sure she edits Sherry Priest. You have to look up. Is it Liz? We'll get the answer for you on that one. I've been reading one of your authors specifically, and my writing style, and I watched you at Worldcon talk about this aspect of writing. I think that my books would be a really good match for you, that you would really enjoy them. Here is the pitch on my novel. You don't want it to be exactly what the editors are already publishing, by the way. You want to share some attributes, but they already have. For instance, if they already have Sherry Priest doing zombie steampunk, another zombie steampunk may not be the thing that they're looking for, but what's that?
So you want vampire steampunk?
Maybe vampire steampunk might match. I don't know. You have to say, like people sending to my editor, which by the way you probably shouldn't do because he has only ever picked up 2 authors that I know of, me and Dan, because he's Moshe. But if you were saying, well, my editor is saying, I write books with really logical magic systems, and I know that you publish Brandon Sanderson, I think my books might be a match for you. Something intrinsic to the author that they seem to like, if you can notice trends, and things like this, then this will be, imagine if you're the editor getting those 2 things. You're like, wow, one just said randomly to the company, the other's been reading the books that I edit and is complimenting them, and thinks that their book is a match. I'm going to see if they're right. Doing your research, knowing these people is going to help you a great deal no matter what's going on. Even if you can't afford to get to the conventions, even if all you can do is read their blog and see what they're saying. If all you can do is read the books that they are publishing and working on. Now, if you do happen to meet them, what you're trying to do is see if this is a good match for you. You are not desperate to publish with anybody. You are looking for a good editorial relationship that will improve your novels and will help you get your book to more people. That's why we talked last week, okay? You always have the self-publishing mechanism to fall back on now. So even if you are dead set on traditional publishing, a bad traditional publishing relationship is not going to serve you well. So your job, you're going and trying to say, is this a person that, their editorial style matches mine? Is this a good match for my book? If yes, then you'll be trying to submit to them. Now, ideally, at one of these cons, you go up and you can chat with them. You find them at a party in a relaxed environment. You ask them what they're working on or something like that. You ask them what author they bought recently and what made them pick up this new author. You don't say, what are you looking for? Because what they're looking for are great books. You ask some very intelligent sort of question that will get them talking about their business and about what they've been working on and what they like, and you're going to learn from them. And then you're going to, if that's a good match, at the end say, it sounds like I have a book that would be right up your alley. Do you mind if I submit it to you? Every time I did that, except for 2 editors, every other one said, yeah, sure, here's my card. 2 times it didn't work, so it will not work sometimes. But often it will work. And then you have something that you can submit to them. You go home from the convention, you get a submission packet ready, you write requested material on the cover, and you overnight it to them. You don't hand it to them right there, but you act like it's a big deal that they have that they're willing to look at your work. Then they'll probably sit on it for 8 months. But this is sort of the way to think. Now, I don't want to say this is going to work for every one of you. In fact, I don't know if it'll work for any of you. The whole point of this is to change the way that you are thinking about publishing, rather than I send it off blindly into the nothing, and I wait and see. Instead, you are, I have picked specific people that I have sent this to. I am in charge of my career. I am a business person who knows what they're doing. I am part of this community and a colleague to these people. Don't be super arrogant. but you do want to be confident about what you're doing. All right? Does this make sense? Are there questions about this sort of thing? All right.
I was wondering about when you submit, or when you talk to your editor and they say,
Yeah.
yes, do that, do you want to ask them what format to, like?
They should have their editing, their submission guidelines on their website. If they do not, then you usually want to submit 3 chapters and an outline. An outline being maybe 2 or 3 page explanation of the entire book, not actually an outline format. It's 3 pages explaining the plot of your novel and the characters. And you want to have that submission packet ready. I think a lot of them are doing it via email now. That's very strange to me because when I was doing this, they're like, no emails, don't send an email. They were all very print, but I think a lot of them are doing email these days. And so, they may ask when you talk to them. You could even say, great, do you want sample 3 chapters in outline? Do you want the full novel? You probably want to be sending them 3 chapters in an outline rather than the full novel, just because there's this whole weird thing called simultaneous submissions, which some editors don't want you to submit a full novel to them unless they're the only one considering it. They want to get the chance to know they have it and be able to ask for it. It's kind of unfair, but it is something that's somewhat entrenched in the publishing industry. It's mostly going away these days, but it's still there. And so nobody counts 3 sample chapters as a simultaneous submission. If they worry about simultaneous submissions, what you end up doing is you send your 3 sample chapters to, say, 6 well-chosen editors that you have researched. You then, if glory be, 2 of them get back to you and want the full. If you're worried about this, what you do is you pick the one that you think is most likely. You send them the full and write to the other and say, it is out on submission, the full manuscript, to another editor right now. I will let you know as soon as I am able to send it to you. Or you can write back both of them and say, do you mind simultaneous submissions? And if neither of them mind, then you send them to both. My editor doesn't mind. That's because he never buys anybody's books. So he feels guilty if they only send them to him. This is because he hates Moshe. He is quite the character, and he is awesome. He's a fantastic editor, but he doesn't buy anybody's books. So yeah, that's simultaneous submissions. Were there any other questions on this? Now you can do this, like I said, reading a blog. You can do this by Googling. You can go to the bookstore, say, what's this new author? Who is their editor? Let me see if I can figure out who their editor is. Were you able to find out Sherry's editor? It was Liz, good. If you're able to, go Google and find out. If you can't, you can email the author and say, who's your editor? How'd you meet them? The worst that can happen is they don't reply, right? So you might as well. You can try and start gathering your little black book of publishing names and professional houses. This is actually very important also in children's because, like I said, most of the big 6 have gobbled up like 6 children's publishers. And so knowing that that these are all like Arthur Levine is Scholastic, as is like this one and this one and this one, and there's like 7 at Harper and things like knowing these imprints all belong to the same publishing houses is very helpful to you. Oftentimes, you don't want to be submitting to multiple people at the same house, but sometimes you can get away with, if they're under the same company, submitting to 2 different editors at 2 different houses. If they both want it, they probably won't compete against each other for the book. But if one rejects it at Arthur Levine, I think that's the name, the Harry Potter one, then somebody else at Scholastic may still be willing to look at it because they're under different imprints, so they kind of work autonomously a lot of times. That isn't always the case, and if you do your research, you'll know when it is and isn't. So I'm going to go quickly down the sci-fi fantasy ones because I do not know the children's ones well enough. When I was trying to break in, I got stonewalled so much by children's that I broke in science fiction and fantasy that I found a lot more welcoming and easy to break into, perhaps because I'm naturally more a member of that community. There are great resources out there for people publishing children's, but I go to Rick Walton and ask him about them. He knows a lot more, particularly he does picture books, but he knows the children's industry a lot better than I do. I broke into children's with an agent. So, the big 6. We talked about the big 6. There's actually a big 5 now that Random House and Penguin have merged. Let's see if I can name the big 6. And you may have to get out Google again for me, because I may forget. So we've got Random, Penguin, which they insist on calling Penguin Random House, but everybody else calls Random Penguin. We have Macmillan. We have Hachette. We have Harper. And the one I always forget, Simon Schuster. Okay, so under each of these, you will find a variety of imprints. There are also small presses that we'll get to next, and there are legit small presses that you would want to consider. So, Random Penguin, under sci-fi fantasy, usually it's going to be under the Bantam imprint or the Del Rey imprint. Yes. So those are the Random House ones. Bantam is what they published George R. R. Martin under. Del Rey was, I believe, Andy Caffrey and David Eddings, and nowadays is the Ruined Man, Painted Man, Brent Weeks. Those are them. And then under the Penguin imprint, they have Ace and Rock, which actually operate as one, even though they have two different imprints. A lot of the editors share. So this is a case where if you submit to Ace and it gets rejected, you probably can't then submit to Rock because it's the same people. And then they also have in kind of a weird relationship with DAW, which is part owned autonomously, but uses all of their legal department and things. So I'm not quite ever sure whether DAW is what's up with DAW, but they're a great house. Macmillan has 1, 4. Hachette is Orbit, sci-fi fantasy. Harper is Voyager. And who's Simon & Schuster? Simon... I told you to leave it open. Simon Schuster. I always have trouble remembering. I don't know if they have a dedicated sci-fi fantasy imprint. It's a small press. They might be with someone and I just haven't paid attention to it. What's that?
It says this is from the end of last year, and they're launching one, but it isn't.
Yeah. So Simon & Schuster, they have a lot of good children's imprints. I think in sci-fi fantasy they have just published under the main Simon & Schuster imprint. What's that? Wool. Wool was probably, yeah, find out what Wool was under, because that was Simon & Schuster. I think they're starting a novella-only imprint also, which is kind of interesting. All right, so while I was looking that up, we will mention some of the small presses.
Just Simon & Schuster.
Yeah, so just Simon & Schuster. Angry Robot, Band, Pyre. Anyone else? Small presses, smaller presses. Shadow Mountain. Am I missing any? I'm sure I'm missing some good ones. Tachyons. Yeah. You'll just have to find out. Like, there are some decent to good. There's some very good small presses, but I don't know a lot of them. I only know a couple of them. But you want to do your research and find out who has what reputation. I can tell you a little bit about some of these different ones. So I'm going to kind of go down these for you, give you a broad overview to give you a jumping point, okay, to launch off on. Okay, so we're going to start right down here. Ace and Rock. Ace and Rock is the first sci-fi fantasy imprint that Tom Doherty ran. Tom Doherty now owns Tor and half owner of Bain. Well, I guess he sold Tor to Macmillan, but he started Tor. He's the president. So this is Ace and Rock was the first one that he started at. It was for a long time a paperback-only publisher, which is where science fiction fantasy started, doing the pulps. It grew up, so to speak, in the 70s and 80s. They do a lot of hardcovers, though a lot of their pulp roots are still around. Pulp means short, fast-paced action-adventure. And so their pulp roots are still very strong. And so you'll see a lot of that sort of, so military science fiction, urban fantasy, fast-paced, fun stuff. you'll see a lot of at Ace and Rock. But they will do basically anything. I've noticed them, offering on epic fantasy projects. I've noticed them offering on on all stuff. So they are, they'll consider anything. My editor considers them, or my agent considers them one of the top publishers to work with. He really likes working with Ace and Rock. He's just had good experiences with their editors. Some of their, one of their editors is BYU grad, Ann Sowards. Where's Howard's? Sowards. Ann Sowards is a BYU grad, and she works there. So there is that. Very good company. They tend to go to a lot of the science fiction fantasy conventions. You will find them there. You'll even find them occasionally at media cons, but you really have to hunt for them. So looking up and finding out who their editors are and things like that is going to be helpful to you. DA, smaller science fiction fantasy house, started by David something Wollheim, D-A-W I think is his initials. It was, I think, mostly is still independent, like I said, but it works with Penguin. They tend to focus on epic fantasy. They do Pat Rothfuss. They tend to like also the big, thick epic fantasies. They like to have strong female protagonists. Also, is a big part of Daw's lineup. They were the ones that started Melanie Ron's, doing a lot of her books and things like that. They have an excellent reputation. They do show up at all the conventions. They were when I was submitting aggressively, I was submitting aggressively only to Tor, Ace, and Daw. These are the three publishers that I would have considered. I started at the top, and I did not want to go anywhere else. Those were the three that I considered, with Tor being my top, and Ace and Daw also being very acceptable that I was submitting to. I really like DAW. I've interacted with their editors. They only have a very few number. There's like 3. I think, you guys will have to do the research on this. I think it might be Mr. Wollheim's wife or daughter who runs it right now. Betsy, I believe, is still in charge of it. This is why, please don't close that, Isaac. Just keep Googling stuff as I ask for it. But yeah, I have some very nice rejection letters from them. So DA, consider them highly if you write epic fantasy. They would be one of the top on my list. Bantam Del Rey, I don't know yet really how they share editorial or not. They've gone through a lot of transitions. They basically ran sci-fi fantasy in the 80s. They were the sci-fi fantasy imprint until Tor kind of took over in the 90s with Robert Jordan and Terry Goodkind kind of spearheading their lines. I'm not sure how they share editorial. They're still very strong, good company. Every time I tried to submit to them, they would not take me without an agent. This is one of the 2 editors that said no to me, was an editor from Del Rey. I don't know if that's still the case, because that was 15 years ago now. So you'll have to do your research. I do see them at the conventions. They have an exceptional reputation, but I'm not sure how to get in with them. They will publish anything. Random House is a very large publisher. I've now worked with them on my teen books, and they've been wonderful to work with. And I would think that this would be a top choice if you can figure out how to get through those doors, which were so hard for me to get through, okay? And like I said, they'll do anything. And George R. R. Martin is their big author right now. So, Tor. What's that? Yeah, Delacorte is my publisher at Random House, one of the children's imprints. Tor, did you look up?
Yeah, it's Betsy Wolf.
It's Betsy,
the daughter.
The daughter. Okay, so it's Sheila Gilbert. That's the other end. Yeah, there's 2 of them that basically run the company, and then they've got an acquisitions editor. And anyway, you could look it up. I don't want to do it all for you. So Tor, Tor is very unique in that it is run much more loosely than the others. It has a very light hand from Macmillan, whereas a lot of the others have much more strong editorial direction from the higher-ups. It's basically Tom Doherty hires editors he thinks are really excited about sci-fi fantasy, and then he lets them buy whatever they can convince him is worth buying, and they each run like basically little imprints based around that editor that they can do what they want. Now there is a lot more sharing between them than I'm implying there, but this is the sense they have so many editors, and each editor's editorial decision making and their tastes are so different from the others Tor can be all across the map on what they'll buy, and getting your book in the hands of the right editor can be very important. As I mentioned, Lee Modisett said there's precisely one editor in all of publishing who would ever buy his stuff, and he's fortunate he found them, him and David Hartwell, and David Hartwell continues to buy and publish his works. So Tor is one of those ones that is very important to pick your editor. Sometimes some of the others it's not quite as important, like for instance Daw. Daw you kind of pick based on does your book match Daw's line, right? And they only have a couple of editors and they're going to share editorial vision because they publish a lot fewer books than Tor. Tor will publish anything if you convince the editor that it's worthwhile publishing and they convince Tom Doherty to give them money. Okay? So at Tor, you've really got to target yourself well. Tor, my agent described it when I told him I really wanted to be there. I'd already gotten an offer there. He said, Tor is fantastic, but there's no adult supervision. Okay? They are chaotic. Their editors have a reputation for being slow to get back to people. It is because they're run this way. They're run by a bunch of nerds who love science fiction fantasy books. And a bunch of nerds who run science fiction fantasy books aren't always the best at bookkeeping. Okay? It's rarely malicious at Tor, but sometimes you get lost.
Yeah, I heard that Tor is like a bunch of separate factions that are loosely aligned. Some of them they're really good about, taking care of their authors, and some of them they're really not.
Yeah, I've heard that too. That was when, anyway, there was a kerfuffle about a certain author who described it that way. But I've noticed that it feels a lot like that. I think they would want to say we are not separate fiefdoms that are sometimes aligned. We are all a collective who loves science fiction fantasy, but each editor's distinctive taste is going to directly influence what they buy a lot more.
It's the Holy Roman Empire.
Yeah, it is. Orbit. Orbit is the newest of the main ones up here. For years, Orbit has been Tor around the world. Like in the UK and France and places like this, Orbit tends to be one of the top publishers of science fiction and fantasy, but in the US they haven't been for many years. And so Hachette said, come in and see if you can break into this market. And so Orbit kind of came in with a bang and bought up a lot of books and is pushing them a lot. Brian McClellan is at Orbit, I believe, right? And so is their lead author is Brett Weeks. I believe there are other authors that are selling really well also, though. Some of them might be as big as Brett. Daniel Abraham's new stuff is all at Orbit. Very good reputation lately among the community because of that. It kind of felt like they sauntered into the bar with their guns out and said, all right, who wants to take us on? And then started throwing money at everybody. That's what they did. And so yeah. Harper, Voyager is the one I know the least about, other than Simon Schuster, which we notice has a blank. Harper Voyager, they had gone through a number of imprints in the last 20 years. They settled on Voyager, which I asked their editor what they do, and she said she really likes urban fantasy a lot. And so urban fantasy would be one of Voyager's focuses. I do know that Harper publishes Terry Pratchett also. And so there is that, but I don't think anyone would not publish Terry Pratchett because he sells a lot of books. And so you can't really often look at their best-selling because sometimes, like anyone would publish an author who's selling a lot of books. They're going to find room for them in their line. You want to look at their mid-listers. You want to look at what the new authors they're buying and releasing are, and that's kind of where their editorial direction is.
My favorite author is
Megan Whalen Turner, and what does she write?
She writes, it's
Fantasy, quasi-historical fiction.
Fantasy quasi-historical fiction is what they say. I will say that their editor, I met her for the first time at Superstars this year writing conference, which is one of the writing conferences, and she was awesome. She was really nice. She was really excited about her line and about her books. And so she seems like she's somebody you could meet and ask questions to. She was being very generous with her time to the students at the writing conference, and so there's that. And Simon & Schuster is looking like they're going to launch an imprint. If they do, then that might be an opportunity for you. A quick few words over here, then we're going to go to Joe. The only one about this that I can talk a lot about, Baen is a fantastic publisher, which kind of falls into the small press line because they're independent. They're a big small press, though. They publish, lots of books every year. Almost all pulp style, okay? military SF, pulp fantasy, sword and sorcery, high action, high adventure, paperbacks most of the time. They're famous for being started by Jim Bain with some money from Tom Doherty, and Jim Bain hated agents. He was famous for paying really low advances, but having great relationships with his authors who'd call him up and be like, I can't make rent, and he'd send them money, and they'd be like, we'll work out how we're going to pay for this later, and stuff like that. Very classics, old school, sort of thing. The Bain advances tend to be small, but they're a very tight-knit community. Their royalties are just as good as anyone else's. And they tend to their authors love them. Larry Correa is one of them. If you want to track him down to the convention and talk to him about Bain, he'll tell you about Bain with Bain. All right? Jim Bain has since passed away, but the company's in very good hands. Jim Mintz is one of their editors, whom I like a lot. I used to read through a bunch of books to him when he was at Ford. He's very nice to me. He's rejected them all, but he's very nice to me. And so, their publisher, Tony Weisskopf, I sat down to dinner with her. And things like that. She's awesome. So great company. And I would put it up with the big ones, except it's independent, so we'll put it over here. Pyre is a small press that came in with a big bang right before Orbit came with a big bang, and I haven't been hearing a lot about them lately. And so I don't know what's up with Pyre. You would have to do your research on them. They've gotten really quiet the last couple of years, and several of their big authors have actually gone to other publishers. Joe Abercrombie was their lead author for a while. Shadow Mountain, you know about Shadow Mountain? BLDS Churches, quote unquote, publishing imprint. It does teen and YA. It's a subsidiary of Deseret Book, which is owned by the church. You can find their editors at local conventions, which is why it's up here, because you can actually meet them around here. Isaac has a book on submission with them. How's that been?
Yes.
Very nice.
It's been very nice, but taking a long time.
Yeah, okay. And I published a book with Tachyon, which is a small press out of, I did Emperor sold the print with them. And the thing to say about that is they were willing to buy, again, I live in Magical Christmas Land, but they were willing to buy print rights only and let me keep ebook rights, which was why I went with them. And then they were able to actually get my book into all the Barnes & Nobles and things, which was really nice. So they got Emperor's Soul shelved at Barnes & Nobles and let me keep the ebook rights so I could self-publish those. So, all right. Let's let Joe go ahead because I want to make sure we get plenty of time for you in Q&A. And if we have to talk about agents next week, we'll talk about agents next week. So, Joe, tell us about self-publishing.
So just out of curiosity, how many of you guys know you want to be writing for like a career? Like you're doing a career wise. Okay, raise them high. How many of you guys have already self-published something? I think we got a couple people over here. How many of you want to self-publish something? All right, that's a good number. And how many of you are kind of on the fence and you're not sure, but you're kind of weighing it out? All right. Yeah, just to get an idea of who I'm talking to. 6 years ago, I was right where you guys were. I took Brandon's class in 2008. I was in the process of writing my first novel with headphones, and then read another novel, and that was the first one I published. And right now, I've got about 20 ebooks out. About 3 of those are short stories.
I'm going to give you the mic. This is just for the recording that will go up online. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, so I've got 20 ebooks out right now. Doing pretty well. Let's see. When I first started out, the first couple of years, I was like lucky to make pizza money. And now I'm doing groceries, rent, gas, and holy crap, I've got self-employment taxes.
Hey, self-employment taxes!
Yeah. So, and it's grown, in just 3 years. So, and actually, it's funny because 6 years ago, when I was in the class here, I never thought I was going to self-publish. And I thought, self-publishing is a kiss of death. I don't want to do it. It's horrible. And if you told me that I was going to be self-publishing, I would have just laughed in the face. And now it's kind of the exact opposite. Like, I'm having so much fun self-publishing. I'm having good success and gaining readers. I'm building a career there. And it's gotten to the point where I don't really see myself going with one of these guys. Things might change. The industry's always changing. Because what happened in the last 6 years, actually really more like the last 4 years, is technological disruption hit publishing. This is after Brandon got in.
I was the last wave, me and Pat, before this hit.
Yeah. Technological disruption, it hit the newspaper industry, it hit the music industry, it's hitting film and movies right now, and TV, and it's hitting music, it's completely changed things there, and it's hit publishing industry right now, and it's opened up. The gates have been opened wide open, you know, anybody can get their works out there, and pretty much anything they want, and people can really, you know, there's a lot of opportunities right now. It's really amazing. I saw that happening, and when I saw that happening, I had 2 novels out. I was kind of like Brandon said, going to different conventions and things, noticing that the publishers, like I write space opera and science fiction. Like I like, you know, galactic empire kind of stuff, space colonization, you know, just, you know, going out in the frontier, final frontier. That's the kind of stuff I like to write. And I noticed that publishers were really taking this. So when I saw this opportunity for self-publishing, I thought, might as well try it, what do I have to lose? And it's really good. Because like, so Brandon gave me a couple, he wanted me to talk. Last year he had me, I just showed up at like a random lecture. You were like, oh, Joe, talk about this. And I was kind of flustered. I guess I'm a little bit now too. But I decided I was going to talk a little bit about some of the things I really love about self-publishing and why I've really chosen that path. I think one of the things I love the most about self-publishing is the creative freedom it gives you. For example, have you guys heard of the book, what is it? Amish Vampires in Space? Yes. That is a real book. It's on Amazon. It's got like 50 reviews, and it's got like a 4.6-star rating. It's like amazing. I haven't read it yet. Looking forward to it. But it looks like a good book. And there's like anything, if you can write it, you can get it out there. There's a whole bunch of creative freedom that you wouldn't have otherwise. Because before, when there's gatekeepers and things, you have to like put it through, with any of these companies, you have to go like sell it to the editor has to sell it to the marketing department has to sell it to other people, and they're looking for something that's just like everything they've ever had, but it's different, and there's people who can kill it along the way, and it's just kind of like, it's a big headache. But when you're self-publishing, you have the freedom to do all kinds of different things, and that's really amazing. I really like that. For example, I started branching off into science fiction romance a little bit. And that's something I never expected to write, but that's the stuff that really took off. And I was really having a lot of fun with that. And the other thing about self-publishing that's kind of connected with that is that you don't have to be a huge bestseller to be successful. How many of you guys have heard of the 1,000 True Fans concept? Anybody? Right. And the 1,000 True Fans concept is basically the idea that when like technological disruption happens and it disintermediates like a bunch of these companies and things, and you can go straight to the readers. Like, if you can, if you're getting the lion's share of these royalties and things, you don't need to have a book that sells to like 100,000 people. You don't have to be a household name to really be successful. If you have 1,000 true fans, and each one of those true fans only spends like $50 on you in a whole year, then you're making $50,000, And you have costs that are associated with that, but because of technology, a lot of those costs are dramatically reduced. The marginal cost for an ebook is 0. Like the cost for like sending another ebook to somebody is pretty much. I mean, there's like a transaction fee that Amazon pretty much eats. It's like minimal, and so like you can make a living as a writer with a much smaller fan base that's more dedicated. So you can have the freedom, to write something that only a few thousand people love, or a bunch of other people love. But you don't have to be a household name. You don't have to be a bestseller. Another thing that I really like about self-publishing is that it gives you a lot of flexibility. With self-publishing, you have the flexibility to reinvent yourself. You can turn on a dime. Like if you see that something is working, the industry is changing in a certain way, you can say, I want to go and do that. For example, I was writing a lot of novels when I was in Brandon's class, and I started self-publishing those, and they were not really selling too much. I saw a lot of people writing serials, like where they were writing the first part of something, the second part, the third part, and I thought, maybe I can write, instead of writing full novels, I can start writing, more novella length kind of stuff, and they'll be like a complete story in themselves, but, I'll be able to write them, and then that way I can make the first one free, because it's a lot easier to get, people are going to download it, are much more likely to get books for free. I mean, readers love free books, you guys know, right? So, it's like free books. And I saw a lot of people having a lot of success with that, but they have one book that's permanently free, and then the other books, you know, are then in a series. So if readers like the first one, then they can move on to the other ones and eventually move on to other stuff like that. You know, I was able to try that, and it worked out pretty well. If other things are happening, you can turn on a dime basically. If you're with the traditional publishers and stuff, it's a little bit harder. They're not as flexible, but when you're self-published, you are very flexible. And you're not locked down in agreements. You're not locked down in a lot of contracts when you're self-published. You do have contractual agreements with like Amazon, Smashwords and stuff. They have a terms of service that you have to read and agree to. Terms of service, though, you can very easily. By the way, if you really want to make reading a terms of service agreement book, like contract, really entertaining, there's like a thing called the Gazoogleizer. It turns into like Ebonics speech and it makes it very entertaining. But anyways, you do agree to those, but those things are usually, you can back out of them. You know, and you can choose, you can pick and choose who you go with. You have a lot more flexibility. When you're self-published, you have a lot of freedom to connect directly with readers. And you have that also with social media and stuff as an author, or as a traditionally published author. But for example, I remember Brendan was talking about how editors, they have their idea about what they want. This editor-tour wants this editor-tour wants that. And you kind of have to guess what the editor wants. When you're self-published, you're guessing what the reader wants. Like you are connecting directly with the reader. There's not really anybody between you and the reader. There's Amazon there that's offering a service that allows you to self-publish. Well, Amazon or Smashwords or Barnes & Noble or any of those other platforms. But really, it's more about writers connecting with readers directly. And you don't have people in between who are like saying, like, oh, mermaids are new vampires or something like that, making restrictions like that, which is really amazing. And the other thing about self-publishing that I've really benefited a lot from is that self-publishing has helped me to, when I first started self-publishing, I started treating my career more like a real career. Like, I started to see myself more as like a self-employed person, like a freelancer. I started to really understand what that means to be that. Like how to handle 1099s, how to handle contractual agreements with other people, like contracting out for cover work, contracting out for editing, things like that. And I started to have money coming in, money going out. I started to see how that's working. And that was really, it made me take a lot more control. A lot more responsibility. It made me change the way I look at my career, which is really, really awesome, actually. And actually, being a self-employed person is a lot of fun. You always, the thing about being a self-employed person is, your boss is a jerk and all your coworkers are really, really boring and stuff because it's all just you. But at the same time, you are your own boss. You set your own schedule. You have your own deadline. And you have no one to blame for your own failures, but your successes are completely your own. And that's probably the biggest thing that I like most about it, is that when I have a success, I own that success. It's mine. And I don't have anyone to blame for failures, but you learn from the failures. And actually, putting yourself out there, having the courage to put yourself out there and make some mistakes and stuff, like you can learn a lot from that and turn that around and really turn that into a success. So those are some things that I've learned about self-publishing. How much time do we have left?
We have about 5 minutes.
Okay.
I'll just say a few words there. We may dig into more of this next week. We've only got 1 week left, so I can not say that very much more often, but I will say, for years...
I can stick around for your questions.
Yeah, and we may do some of those. I just want to say, for years, we thought self-publishing just never going to take off. It's never going to take off, never going to take off. And it was overnight, like I told you guys. Like literally, I went from 9 books. I brought my royalty statements to Superstars this year. 9 books on 1 royalty statement sold as an ebook to something like 20,000 sold in the next royalty statement, the next 6-month period. Like overnight. It was the 2010, I think we figured it out. The Christmas 2009 going into 2010 with the Amanda Hawking stuff. Everybody got e-readers and boom, it took off. And Words of Radiance was 2/3 ebook in its opening week. And so that's an abnormal number still in the industry. I will even out at probably 60-40 print still probably, but maybe closer to 50-50 across the life of the book.
Well, here's the question. How many of you guys have heard of Hugh Howey? Just raise your hands if you've heard of Hugh Howey. He's a huge success story with publishing. He wrote a short story novella of Wool that went on to give sold at Gangbusters, another print-only deal. He did really amazing.
This is the big landmark print-only deal.
Yes. He's the big name that everyone talks about when it comes to self-publishing. How many of you guys have heard of Ellen Ironside? One person, okay. How many of you guys have heard of Lindsay Baroker? How many of you guys have heard of Andrea K. Host? How many of you have heard of David Adams? We got one over here. Nice. You don't put this on YouTube, but I hope you have to see that. The real story of self-publishing isn't that there's a few people who are making a big amount of money. It's that there are thousands and thousands of people like me, like the people I mentioned, who are just quietly uploading their books, building a small fan base, digging out a little niche for themselves, and making it, and doing really well, and making a career for themselves. And they're not the guys that you're going to all hear about. They're not the ones who are going to be on the news because they're not sensational. But in the aggregate, there are so many of them that they are really taking the world by storm.
Right. I can remember when I wanted to break in, what I kept telling myself is, if I could make a living at this, doesn't have to be a good living. I can make a living where I can pay my rent and have food and things like that. Then I would do that for the rest of my life. This is what makes self-publishing so exciting, is there are a lot more people capable of doing this in this industry now than there used to be. More people are making a living as writers because of self-publishing. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah.
So let's go ahead and do a few questions. We don't have a lot of time. We've got like 3 minutes left, so maybe one question for Joe, and we'll try to talk some more about this next week.
Back here?
I wanted to ask, how do you find the fans that are going to like your ebooks and get it into their hands?
How do you find the fans? Yeah.
How do you find the fans? A lot of hocus pocus. No. The concept. I know. Yes, I can let the cat. What I have found that works really well, and there are a lot of people. There's a book you can go to by David Duran called Let's Get Visible. I would recommend that if we're talking about discoverability and marketing.
What was it called?
That I found is really good. Let's Get Visible. He also wrote one called Let's Get Digital, which is about how to get published. That's another good one. In general, what I found is that it's a combination of having a couple of books that are out for free, writing in series so that people can go from one to the next one, and writing and releasing a lot of books. I didn't see a really big, uptick. I didn't really see me hitting the curve and actually doing pretty well until I had about 15 ebooks out. But at that point, the more books you have out, the more like somebody discovers one of them, and they also discover all the other ones. And then the more of your stuff that they read, the more they remember you, the more they're interested in finding your next book. Another way that really works is to have an email list. You basically, on your website, or you have a list where it says, enter your email here, and I'll email you when I have a new book out. And at the end of all your books, you say, hey, if you want to hear about my new releases, here's the link, here's how you can follow it. That has also been a very useful tool, too. So every time I release a book, I'll send out an email. That works.
Okay, we're out of time. Joe will probably hang around if people want to ask questions. We will come back next week for our last class, and we'll talk about the final then. Okay, don't stress it. Contracts are up here if you want to see them.
That's the only final. Oh yeah, Matt.